Janavallabha Girivaradari Yasoda Nanda Rajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Krishna Bhagavan Prabhupada Chaya also say so we see Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai Namacharya Haridas Thakur ki jai Prem Sagaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki jai Sri Radha Krishna Gopal Gopal Sham Kunda Radha Kodagiri Govardhan ki jai Sri Vrindavan Dham ki jai Navadip Dham ki jai Ganga Shamala Tulsi Bhakti Devi ki jai Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda ki jai Go Premanandi All glory to the Son of the Lord is all glory to the Son of the Lord is all glory to the Son of the Lord is all glory to Sri Guru and Sri Guranga all glory to Sri Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Nama Om Vishnu Banaya Krishna Prastha Buddhale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shanyavadi Paschatare Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare From Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 10 Chapter 46 Verse 32 Yasmin Jana Prana Viyoga Kale Kshanam Samaveshya Mano Visuddham Nirhritya Karmasayam Asuyati Param Gatim Brahma Mayorka Vanaha Yasmin, in whom jana, any person, prana, from one's life air, viyoga, of separation, kale, at the time, kshanam, for a moment, samavesha, absorbing, mana, one's mind, avisudam, impure, nirhitya, eradicating karma, of the reactions of material work, asayam, all traces, asu, immediately, yati, he goes, param, to the supreme, yatim, destination, Brahma Maya, in a pure spiritual form. Arka, like the sun. Varna, whose color. Translation, anyone, even a person in an impure state who absorbs his mind in him for just a moment at the time of death, burns up all traces of sinful reactions and immediately attains the supreme transcendental destination in a pure spiritual form as effulgent as the sun. You too have rendered exceptional loving service to him, Lord Narayana, the super soul of all and the cause of all existence, the great soul who, although the original cause of everything has a human-like form, what pious deeds could still be required of you? Infallible Krishna, the Lord of the devotees, will soon return to Vraja to satisfy his parents. Purport here, Uddhava begins to deliver Lord Krishna's message. Having killed Kamsa, the enemy of the Yadus, in the wrestling arena, Krishna will now surely fulfill his promise to you by coming back. O most fortunate ones, do not lament. You will see Krishna again very soon. He is present in the hearts of all living beings, just as fire lies dormant in wood. Purport, Uddhava understood that Nanda Yasoda were very impatient to see Krishna, and thus he reassured them that Krishna would come soon. For him, no one is especially dear or despicable, superior or inferior, and yet he is not indifferent to anyone. He is free from all desire for respect, and yet gives respect to all others. He has no mother, no father, no wife, children, or other relatives. No one is related to him, and yet no one is a stranger to him. He has no material body and no birth. He has no work to do in this world that would oblige him to take birth in pure, impure, or mixed species of life. Yet, to enjoy his pastimes and deliver his saintly devotees, he manifests himself. Although beyond the three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the Transcendental Lord accepts association with them as his play. Thus, the unborn Supreme Lord utilizes the material modes to create, maintain, and destroy. Purport is stated in Brahma Sutra, Lokavat Lila Kaivalyam. The Lord performs his spiritual pastimes as if he were a resident of this world. Although the Lord does not favor or abuse anyone, we still observe happiness and suffering in the world. The Gita says, Karanam Guna Sangosya. We desire to associate with various qualities of material nature, and thus we must accept the consequences. The Lord provides the field of material nature in which we exercise our free will. Foolish non-devotees not only attempt to cheat the Lord by trying to exploit his nature, but when they suffer the reaction, they blame God for all their own misdeeds. This is the shameless position of those who are envious of God. So this is Uddhava speaking here, and previously he had praised Krishna and Balaram as Supreme Lord, who could understand everything. Here, in these verses, he is showing how, because they are the Supreme Lord, Nanda and Yasoda don't have to worry, because they are concentrating their minds on him, as was illustrated when they described his various activities previously. So, therefore, they will end up in the spiritual world. This, of course, is a consolation for people in the material world, but not really a consolation for Nanda and Yasoda, since they don't care about being in Vaikuntha or anywhere else. They only want to see Krishna directly. Nevertheless, Uddhava is praising the Supreme Lord because he makes most auspicious arrangements for everybody, ultimately, whether it is people in the material world or his devotees in the spiritual world. So, in any case, he says that Krishna will return, and that is his basic message. Since he has carried out the killing of Kamsa, then he will come back. And therefore, Nanda and Yasoda should not lament. And he says here again that he will return he will come very soon. So this, of course, is a little bit problematic because he actually doesn't come back soon in one sense. And it's many, many years later when he finally returns after killing not only Kamsa but many other demons. So that is a little problematic. But here he makes another statement that actually the Lord is residing in all living beings. So therefore he's always present within you. So there's no necessity of him returning because he's already there. He's inside you. So that's a good answer to the idea that he hasn't returned and he won't return for a long time. No, the Lord is already there. He never leaves you. And then he describes the Lord in some very precise ways to indicate the nature of the Lord and how he will respond to the people of Vrindavan. So in one sense he is Sama, and he doesn't hate, he doesn't despise anybody. He's at the same time he's not indifferent to anyone. He has no desire for material respect, and he gives respects to every other living entity. He has no father, mother, relatives at all, but yet he's related with everyone in the most intimate way. So this, of course, is speaking from the material point of view. He has no mother, father, etc. Actually, he accepts Nanda and Yasoda as his father and mother. And he even tells that to Vasudeva, that actually Nanda and Yasoda are my father and mother. So he also accepts that. But of course this is not material, this is on the spiritual level. So in the material world we accept persons as parents or our sons and daughters, etc. And this gives rise to material possessiveness, maya, etc. So the Lord does not have any of that type of possessive instinct, materially motivated instinct, and therefore he's not contaminated. Spiritually, of course, he has attachment, and he has attachment in various ways. He has attachment to friends, attachment to servants, attachments to mother and father, attachment to the gopis, etc. That does not give rise to material possessiveness at all. Rather, it is spiritual possessiveness. The devotees are attached to the Lord, and the Lord is attached to the devotees. And that is the cause of bliss in the spiritual world. So that can never be criticized. So in the material world, yes, material relationships are condemned. But in the spiritual world, those relationships become the basis of bliss and prema. So therefore, they are never rejected. So because Krishna is the Supreme Lord, obviously he doesn't have any material contamination, no material body, no material relationships. But at the same time, he does respond to the devotees in the most appropriate way. And though he has no work to do, he's not subject to karma. He appears in the material world to deliver the devotees and satisfy the devotees. So in other words, Uddhava is presenting the idea that the Lord cares about the devotees and he responds to them in the most appropriate way, most satisfying way. So this is a reassurance also that the Lord will satisfy Nanda and Yasoda. So in this way, the position of the Lord looks a little bit contradictory. On the one hand, he's very attached to the devotees. On the other hand, he's very detached from everything in the material world, including all relationships in the material world. So this is a little bit difficult for some people to accept, and therefore they don't want to accept such qualities in the Supreme Lord. Ultimately, of course, we have the extreme case where people will not accept any qualities in the Supreme Lord, because qualities will mean something like this, that we end up with attachment to devotees, etc. And in the material world, attachment is very detrimental for spiritual development. So, therefore, the extreme case is no relationships, no qualities at all. So it's simply the goal is simply the absence of everything material. So this becomes liberation or moksha. So definitely it is spiritual because it is beyond the ignorance that causes bondage in the material world, and there is no karma in that state. So in that sense we call it spiritual. At the same time, there is no recognition of the Supreme Lord and his wonderful qualities. So therefore there's also a lack of bliss in a relationship with the Lord. So for that reason, even though it is spiritual, it's also condemned by the devotees as being very inferior. So as we see here, the spiritual world is very similar to the material world. There are objects, there are people, there are bodies, there are relationships. But they're quite different. So if we can accept that difference, fine, we can accept the spiritual world and bhakti and prema, etc. If we cannot accept the difference, then we will reject everything and we'll end up with the impersonal Brahman and moksha. So one who has faith in the spiritual world and the pastimes in the spiritual world, then he practices bhakti. How does one get that faith? Which means a conviction. How does he get that conviction? So that itself takes the influence of devotees. And due to the influence of devotees, then gradually they begin to accept that existence of Supreme Lord, spiritual world, spiritual forms, etc. And everything that goes with it. But if they don't get that association and mercy, then they will reject it as being Maya again. So the Rupa Goswami in the Nectar of Devotion, he writes the work in order to defeat the idea that the relationships in the spiritual world are Maya or material, because they look like that. So just as we have material love relationships, so in the spiritual world we also have relationships whether it is Sakya or Vatsalya or Madhurya. But the whole point is that these relationships do not give rise to suffering and ignorance and rebirth. Rather, the opposite. They give rise to the highest spiritual bliss, or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, ocean of bliss in the spiritual world with rasa. So, Rupa Goswami wrote the work for the devotees. And then he prays that this work will smother the tongues of the Gyanis and the Karmis and the Yogis and others who may criticize rasa because it's material. Therefore, it takes a person to have faith, and if he has faith, then he can understand the nature of Krishna, the form of Krishna, spiritual world, pastimes, etc. So in that sense, the Bhagavatam is meant for those who are devotees of the Lord, those who have faith in the Lord. They can appreciate it. And others, they are derived of that taste completely. The Lord is ultimately not just relating with the devotees, but very, very attached to all the devotees. As much as the devotees are attached to the Lord is attached to them. So the highest devotees are the devotees in Vrindavan, and therefore the Lord is most attached to them. So the attachment of the devotees is made clear by their symptoms in separation when Krishna goes to Mathura. And then they develop all sorts of extraordinary symptoms in separation. Why? Because of their attachment. The greatest attachment gives rise to the greatest symptoms of separation. This, of course, we could say is one reason why the Lord does this, in order to show the world and to show the Yadus the superior nature of the people of Vrindavan and that type of love. The separation shows that. At the same time, we would expect that Krishna would not stay separate from them, that he would return. So within prema, we see in the Nectar Devotion, when it describes the different primary rasas, they are described in meeting and in separation, two aspects of prema. And so it's not just one, both are there. So if there's separation, there must also be meeting. The Lord's present with the devotee. Therefore, if here we have a separation, then we should also conclude with a meeting. So that is why the acharyas raise this example from story from the Padma Purana that Krishna did return after killing Dandavakra and Mathura, whereas it's not directly mentioned in the Bhagavatam at all, because there should be a conclusion to the separation at a certain point in time. Now, the only problem with this is that here Krishna says, Uddhava says, he's going to return very soon. And Krishna himself told Nanda Maharaj, I will return very soon. So after the killing of Dandavakra, that's not very soon. It's many, many years later. After all these other demons were killed, after Kurukshetra, etc. Even at Kurukshetra, Krishna said, I'm going to come back after I finish the last few demons. And that took a few years also. So it wasn't immediate. It was very a long time. So this becomes a contradiction. Krishna says, I return soon, and he doesn't return soon. It's so long later. But then that cannot be also because Krishna should not tell a lie. So that is why, of course, we can say that in one sense, yes, internally, but then Krishna says, I will return. He doesn't mean internally. He means I will actually return, go back to Vrindavan, and I'll meet the people there. So that is why Vishnu Chakravarti gives this explanation to show that he came back, but that's another form. So after a few months,
before he sent Uddhava, actually, Krishna had returned to Vrindavan. But we get two forms, the one that returned and therefore fulfilled the promise, and the form that did not return, and that's prolonged the separation for even further. So, in this way, the promise of Krishna is fulfilled and he returned soon. Why there should be prolonged separation at all, as I said, one, of course, is to show the world that the extraordinary nature of the love of the people of Vrindavan, and to show how superior it is to the love of the Yadus or anyone else. The other, of course, is that, of course, spiritually speaking, time is not a consideration, because 1 second become like a yuga, and 1 yuga can be like a second. So when in the Ras Leela, 1 night was extended to yuga, or night of Brahma. And a blinking of an eyelash and separation from Krishna, when you blink your eyes and not seeing Krishna, that's like a yuga also. So in one sense, time we should not consider in the normal way. Of course we say it's a long time. But then, of course, when Krishna does return, then there is also great celebration, great joy because of that meeting after long separation. So the nature of love itself is, in the spiritual world, is meeting and separation. Both aspects are there. So here we find an example of a prolonged separation. Other times there are short separations of a few hours. So both types of separation are there. And this is an example of prolonged separation. And it increases the intensity of the love, so that when they meet, there will be also intensity there in their relationship.
Maharaj, you mentioned that Lord always cares for his devotees. But most common people ask question, if he's caring for devotees, why devotees are suffering? Their health problems and so on.
Yeah. Well, of course, the care ultimately is on 2 levels. One is the spiritual, one is the material level. Those who are more advanced do not care about the material level, and they simply accept whatever karma is there, and or they take any suffering as karma, and that's their responsibility. On the other hand, they don't ask the Lord to remove that karma, rather they simply continue with the performance of their bhakti. For those that are less advanced, of course, they may not be able to tolerate their suffering and whatever, and no response from the Supreme Lord. So we see there are different types of people that approach the Lord. We have those who are suffering, and they apply to the Lord to remove their suffering. Those in want of wealth, and they apply to the Lord. So we see many cases where the Lord responds. So he responded to Gajendra, he responded to Uddhava, and of course we have Balaji responding to all the devotees and giving them money and whatever like that. Because they want money, he gives them money. So we have many examples of that also. Maybe not their karma to get money, but they worship Balaji and they get money. So the Lord does respond also. Now technically, the process of bhakti itself removes karma, destroys all karma, destroys all desires that produce karma, destroys ignorance, etc. So the process of destroying karma may be even instantaneous, like the case of Ajamil. But even though the karma is destroyed, it doesn't look like it. So there's an appearance. With Ajamil, it didn't look like he was any different after he named his son Narayana, even though technically all of his karmas were gone. He just looked like the same person. So, therefore, even for the devotees who have their karma destroyed by the process of bhakti, there's an appearance of karma there. There's a pattern that remains, that looks like karma. And that may remain even for the highest devotees in prema. They look like they have sickness, they have a death, obviously, at a certain point in time. So these look like karma. A lifespan with a death at a certain time, sickness at a certain time. But it's not. It's a pattern that the Lord keeps only. And it's not under the law of karma. It's under the Supreme Lord at that point. So there's an appearance of karmas for the devotees. So, yes, the Lord is compassionate to all the devotees, but as I say, his greatest compassion is that he wants to see them develop devotion more and more until they get prema. And when they get prema, that's the ultimate compassion of the Lord. So in that process, simply destroying suffering or taking away suffering may or may not be beneficial for that devotee at a certain point in time in terms of development of prema. And therefore the Lord will be discreet in how he deals with different devotees. In some devotees he may take away everything. He may take away all wealth, so they will surrender more. In others he may give everything, as he gave to Dhruva. So it depends on the Lord and the devotee, the particular devotee, how the Lord will interact with the devotee. So he'll do what is beneficial for their spiritual advancement.
Maharaj, it is said that any person in an impure state who absorbs his mind even just a moment at the time of death burns up all the traces of sinful reaction. But here we see almost many people, they come in touch with Lord Krishna and their mind is getting absorbed. Is it that everyone will get out of that sinful reaction, or only people who absorbs at the time of death?
Well, either way, if they become absorbed in the Lord, there's no problem. But what is absorption itself? To become absorbed in the Lord at the time of death is actually very difficult because of so much physical problems, and it's very difficult to control the mind and pain and so many things there. Fear, so many things are there. So very difficult for most people to absorb the mind or even think of the Lord, much less absorb themselves in the Lord at the point of death. So to become absorbed in the Lord at the point of death, they would have to do very great practice throughout their life in order to do that. Very, very difficult to do, completely concentrate on the Lord. So we see, of course, persons like Bhishma, because he's a perfect devotee, no problem. And he doesn't care about the pain and whatever like that. And he can concentrate fully on the Lord, but most people can't do that. Very, very difficult for them to concentrate completely. They may concentrate a little, but not completely.
Maharaj, Hare Krishna. Maharaj, how does the time work? You have explained several times about the time, but for example, after Krishna comes back, do they forget the past, the time when they were suffering? Is it over? Do they have the same, and especially the same problem that we have, that sometimes we live the past and this gives us grief and anxiety or even revenge feelings when we think certain bad things in the past?
Well, when they meet Krishna, there is also an anxiety that Krishna will disappear again. So even in meeting, there is some sort of separation. And sometimes in meeting, that feeling of separation becomes so great that they don't even see Krishna. They think he's gone already, even when he's standing before them. So this is a type of symptom of ecstasy, that they have separation when actually Krishna is not even gone. He's right there. And other times, they will fear that he will go away again. So then they get separation within meeting. On the other hand, within separation, we also get meeting. That due to the intensity of their devotion to the Lord, then Krishna appears within them and they get some sort of satisfaction from that. So we get the two contrary cases, separation in meeting and meeting in separation.
Maharaj, there is, for example, but in this case, the many people here who are doing like motivational discourses and so many things, he says, live the present, don't live the past, don't live the future, just live the present. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that, if it's like that should be, or one should always, because the present instantly becomes the past, one should live the future? What would be the best recommendation for a devotee who is a transcendentalist in this case?
Well, in terms of devotees, they have to concentrate on what they're doing at the present moment. That is their sadhana. And that will produce future results. But we can't do nothing now and think of a future without doing anything at the moment. Or we can't do nothing now thinking of the past and blaming the past for our present position of doing nothing. Rather, we should simply do the sadhana and concentrate on that with devotion. So that's the present. And that gives results.
When you talk about the aspect of time, material time, it works only when Krishna desires to activate the material world. Just like that in the spiritual world also, only when Krishna makes a decision of appearing or disappearing, the time is, I think, activated. Otherwise, there is no time aspect at all in the spiritual world. So in whatever the way we see that, it is Krishna's desire which makes everything. Every aspect of creation, either it is material or in the spiritual world, it is only just depending upon Krishna's desire, as far as the aspect of time is concerned. So how we are involved, how we can get related with time with that?
How we can get?
Related with time.
Well, automatically, as long as we have material bodies, we're under subject to material time.
But it is only because of Krishna's desire. Only when he starts or desires to activate the material world, the time acts. Till
Yeah.
the
Well,
time is up.
even when it's not active, everyone is in Mahavishnu, they're still affected by time. Because they sit within Mahavishnu for a certain period of time. And then they come out. And then they become active again. They're not aware of the time, but it's acting on them anyway.
You are mentioning about the Rupa Goswami's intention to develop faith on spiritual world form qualities. Can we not say that even those who are impersonalists, they don't have faith on the Lord? Impersonalists, they don't have faith on the Lord. They
Not
also
in the form of the Lord without qualities and form and activities.
still they have
They
a
have
faith.
faith in Brahman.
But how do they explain about the person, who doesn't have any form? How do they keep faith on the person? Because he's invisible.
No person. There is no form, so there's no person.
How, see, if I want to keep faith on someone, I need to see the person, or, some object should be there, then I can keep it.
Well, that's our idea, but not for the impersonalist. It's all negative. No form, no quality, no activity, no person. Absence of karma, absence of ignorance. That's the state of liberation.
Here also you see Uddhava also sometimes, he is also giving some kind of idea like this, he is indifferent. When you say indifferent means, is no work, nothing.
Well, it says he's not indifferent. He doesn't see high, low, inferior, superior, dear or despicable, but he's not indifferent.
Means he's indifferent.
Not indifferent. So he does have relationships, but he in no way discriminates based on material forms, higher, lower, good, bad, etc.
Maharaj, I have one question. Maharaj, the creation is like 3/4 is spiritual, 1/4 is material. When annihilation happens, does every thing gets annihilated or material itself only?
Prakriti remains.
Prakriti remains.
The forms are dissolved, but Prakriti remains, and jivas remain.
So from the starting, from the creation, even after annihilation, all the souls are the same, like it is always the same. It's not new or old or...
Same souls, but except those that get liberated. Then they're not in the material world anymore.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj.